Hello, my name's Damian Wyld and I'm from the Australian Family Coalition. It's great to be partnering with this second video with Full Gospel Business Australia, discussing some very important issues affecting the family. So wherever you're tuning in from, be it Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia or beyond, I hope that there's something here of importance to you and something that will benefit you perhaps in your own family. In our last video, we discussed some important challenges facing families, not only internal but external, and we considered family in a couple of different ways. Firstly, the family as an idea, as an institution, basically as the fundamental building block of society. And we also talked about individual families, that is, your family, my family. In this video, I'd like to take that concept a little bit further and actually talk about the family as we experience it, yours and mine. I've been a pro-family advocate for the best part of 20 years, but it was really a wake-up call to me when, probably some 5 years ago now, I received a letter one day from a bishop here in Australia, and he said something very eye-opening to me. He said, "Wonderful though your work is, important though it is to be advocating good sound policies to state and federal parliamentarians trying to achieve good outcomes for families across our country, the most important thing you can do as a husband and a father is invest in your own family." Now, of course, as a husband and father, I should know those things, and I'm sure that deep down I do and I did. But to have someone put it in such blunt terms was a wake-up call that all the good work we can do as advocates pales compared to that need to play the best role that we possibly can to help our own individual families to flourish. When I began my work as a pro-family advocate in the early 2000s, I did so because I very much cared about the role of the family in our society. But as I'm sure those of you will know who are married and parents yourself, when you do take on that new state in life, it gives you a very different perspective. Of course, we were all children ourselves once. We all come from families ourselves, but marrying and having families of our own gives you a very unique understanding, I think, particularly when it comes to all the cares and challenges and wanting the best for our spouses and our children. It goes without saying that beyond our own families, if we want to have a healthy society, we cannot possibly do that without healthy families. Interestingly, some good analysis I read in recent years on the state of the family and on some internal and external influences that we need to be considerate of came from American commentator Rod Dreher. Now, some of you will be familiar with his books, The Benedict Option and Live Not by Lies. He's an interesting commentator because having spent time in different Christian faith backgrounds, he has a very unique ability, I think, to speak to different audiences and to engage them in some of these very key issues that we're going to talk about. Perhaps the crux for me of what he talked about in terms of influences on the family was when he talked about children in school and the sort of influences that they will receive there in their perhaps 30 odd hours per week. Dreher talks in The Benedict Option about the naive belief of some parents that their mere chats around the family dinner table, if such an event even takes place in many homes at all anymore, the idea that a 20-minute, half-hour chat, and I'm paraphrasing here, can somehow balance against the sort of weight of external influences children are receiving is naive. Now, this is not to alarm anybody that anything and everything that comes from outside the family and from the school is bad and evil and to be shunned, but Dreher warns to be incredibly invested, to use that word again, in what our children are being influenced by. So again, not to be alarmist nor fearful, but going forward and discussing some of these things, I'd like to stress some positive influences that we really ought to be mindful of. The first of these, as we've already broached, is that of education. Now, it's really important to note that parents are the primary educators of their children. We certainly know that in their formative years. Everything they learn, everything they mimic, they get from their parents, first and foremost. Just because children suddenly attend school, a kindergarten, a primary school, a high school, parents don't suddenly lose their rights or their interests in their children's education. Parents remain at all times the primary educators of their children. That they choose to outsource that obligation, or to involve the schools or the government through their education departments and curricula in the education of their children, is entirely the prerogative of parents at the end of the day. And I think too many parents ignore that fact, or perhaps forget that fact. This is not to criticise parents. They are incredibly busy people, working, raising their families, but perhaps they forget their rights and their responsibilities. And it's very important to remember that that role remains at all times. So having an interest in what children learn, even if they outsource that role, as I said, to a school, not only a public school but a Christian school, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, parents have to maintain a very keen interest in what their children learn. The next thing to talk about is the internet. Now, we mentioned this briefly in the last episode. The internet, a bit like television before it, can be a fantastic tool. It can also be a terrible curse if misused and mishandled. It's a bit like fire. You've heard the saying, it's a wonderful servant but a terrible master. The internet can be a wonderful tool. It can open up an incredible range of learning opportunities. And right now, as many of us are going through different sorts of restrictions due to government responses to coronavirus, the internet is something that we have come to rely on very heavily. It has been a fantastic tool for communication. It's the very means through which I'm speaking to you now. Likewise, social media. Social media can be a fantastic tool. I've met and made some wonderful friends online and through social media. Not to put too fine a point on it, I met my wife online. So these can be amazing things, bringing people together from all across the world to learn wonderful things, to share their faith. The possibilities are unlimited. But it goes without saying that never before have we had such a direct window into our own homes, into our very pockets through a mobile phone. Never before have our children been so easily exposed to external influences and potentially prying eyes through the internet and through social media. The risk of children being exposed to pornography at a young age is incredibly real, right in the family home. The risk of bullying through social media, which is another modern phenomenon, is very real. I don't say these things to alarm, but simply because parents must be cognizant of these things. Only allowing children to access mobile phones at an appropriate and responsible age. Being mindful of when it's appropriate for them to have an account on social media. Ensuring that family computers are used and maintained in open and public areas of the home. These are all common sense things, but things that we need to constantly remind ourselves of. And let's face it, many of these things are relevant for adults too, not simply our children or our grandchildren. And further to that, I would say a very important point, something I have to remind myself of. Screen time can be an absolute killer on the family. The number of adults I've seen who are addicted to their phones, their tablets, just spending time online, talking to people on the other side of the world, but perhaps neglecting those in their immediate vicinity. It's a very strange modern phenomenon, but it's one that we should be mindful of. These are some very particular issues in and around the family home, but I wanted to now touch on some broader factors affecting family stability, because if we want flourishing, healthy families, we need to ensure that at a broader, perhaps more macro level, that we do what we can to try and ensure that the factors are in our favour in terms of creating stable, long-lasting families. As you can imagine, some of the issues around family stability will be economic. Some of these are at a very high level, government policies affecting our abilities to have employment, to easily buy or have a family home, the ability to have a family wage. All of these things affect family formation. The education level of parents is also incredibly important. But what I just want to touch on briefly here and to stress are some of the social conditions that are very important in family stability. One of these is the issue of cohabitation. Now, I've got no doubt that many people will consider it very quaint, the idea that living together outside of marriage or prior to marriage could somehow be in any way bad. And I'm not even discussing the morality of it here. The facts simply show, though, that cohabitation before marriage or outside of marriage lends itself to family instability in the future. That's a fact. It's been proven time and time again. People who tend to wait for marriage and family formation tend to have longer lasting marriages and more cohesive families. That lends itself to a number of considerations for parents right now. Looping back to our earlier discussion about education, it means that sex education is something that parents need to have a very keen interest in. What your children are learning in their school. Are they being taught everything that would concern you, or are they ideally being taught about the option of abstinence and waiting? And of course, as parents, having these sorts of discussions is going to be incredibly difficult in our modern, highly sexualised culture. But it's something that you're going to need to discuss with your children. Forewarned is forearmed. We can try to cotton wool our children and protect them from the world as much as possible. But at the end of the day, they need to be aware of these influences. Another key factor in family stability is whether parents in a family come from intact families themselves. Now, this is not something that we can often influence. We don't have much say in what our own parents chose to do in the past. But it is something to be mindful of, that sadly, family breakdown can be an intergenerational issue, that children of broken homes often struggle to create long-lasting intact families themselves. This is not a criticism of those people. In fact, I've seen some remarkable instances of people who've come from those challenging backgrounds and have been able to turn their situation around and give their own children that which they did not have themselves. But it is important rather to be mindful that in creating and maintaining a good family structure, we are setting our children up for every possible success in the future. And of course, I don't think I need to stress too greatly for you as a Christian watching this, the importance of faith, not only as an individual, but within the family. The family has been called by some the domestic church, and that's for good reason. Even at a very natural level, as we touched on in the last video briefly, those who practice their faith within the family will find that family stability tends to follow. It is no guarantee, of course, but the studies have shown that parents, particularly those who share a faith and practice it within the home, will find that as a huge factor in family stability. The role of a father, in particular, in practicing his faith within a family is huge. Obviously, for both parents imparting their faith, praying with their children, undertaking rituals as a family of different types is incredibly important. But when a father practices faith within the family and is seen to do so by the children, that is an incredibly stabilising factor, which really, again, can't be overstated. So I guess what I'm saying to you is, consider these things, but particularly as a Christian, make sure you have a very healthy family prayer life, and in all the forms that you choose to worship and practice your faith together, to make sure you do it and to do it regularly. In closing, it's really incredible how people invest so much time and energy into their work, into their hobbies, and into other facets of their life. And none of these are bad things. They're all good when done with the right degree of consideration. But it's astonishing how few people consider investing time in their family, not leaving that as the last thing in the day and almost as an optional add-on. It's something that we all need to be mindful of. And I'm not sitting here to preach to you or to anyone. As a father of 7 children myself, I have to constantly remind myself that my work is important, a bit of downtime and my own outlets are very important, but investing time into my family is, as that man said to me some years ago, the most important work that I can do. We'll have some more to say in our next video, but for now, if you found some benefit from what we've been talking about here in this video today, I do encourage you to visit our website, the Australian Family Coalition website at austfamily.com.au. If you click up the top on the sign up box, you can sign up for our regular free emails. So until next time, I hope you've enjoyed this video and thank you for joining us.